you doing tonight? What was your topic on your panel?
Nice to meet you. I've never actually talked to you before, so hello, hi.
It's the weird parasocial thing where I've seen videos of you, so I feel like I know you anyways.
Oh wow. Yeah. So what we were talking about, we talked about that the NYPD hired the first female officer, a female commissioner. Sorry, commissioner.
I was like,
no, not officer.
Weird.
Commissioner. It's the African American woman. And we were.
Is she based?
Don't know. Who knows, right?
I feel like a lot of times you get like these like black female governors that are like, or like, you know, just politicians or police officers that end up being like really right wing. It happens a lot.
That's the thing. We don't really know anything about her. I wish I did know. But I think people on its face look at it as a win. And I was arguing that so often is the case where you put black faces in high places, right? They just simply repeat the systems that were there previously, right? And in fact, it might get even worse because they may feel they have to prove something. I mean, I think with President Obama.
So you were arguing what my initial reaction was. You're like, she might be, she might be based, guys. We gotta look.
Well, of course, obviously, you have a different definition of that than I do. Fair enough. But you know, I think there was a level of that with President Obama where, like, he didn't want to be seen as helping the black community too much, right? He didn't want to be seen as the president for black people, right? And how he expressed that, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, really? Yes. And how he expressed that was like, well, instead, I'll just like try to do these help or reforms that help in the margins, right? That might help black people a bit more because of their economic place in the country, rather than having targeted legislation. And we can do that, right? For instance, when now that we have the attacks against our Asian brothers and sisters that's happening, right? We have the Stop Asian Hate bill. I think that's what it was called, right? That was put out. We can target individual groups. Fine, we want to help them. But Obama didn't decide to specifically help African Americans because he didn't want to be that guy. And there was a waste of opportunity.
Saying Obama is white, and that's why. Do you agree?
Obama.
Is Obama actually white? Okay, let's see the Stop Asian Hate bill. So you're, but I feel like there have been bills that have been created to specifically help black people or minorities in general, like
minorities in general.
Our chat. Were there bills passed by Obama to specifically help black people?
And I'm not trying to say people of like working class, right? Because that's usually a stand-in for black people. I'm talking about actually targeting a community that needs help, and not just us. Like not like, hey, we should have.
Why can't it just be like poor people or something? And like so if you pass black people, like white people, and like anyone
poor people, it's going to disproportionately help black people because black people are disproportionately living in poverty still due to where they started.
Yeah.
So do you have an issue with that support? So like, do they have to explicitly state this is just poor people help for black people? Like,
no, there was no law that said that. It was only just
no. What I'm saying is like, would Prime do you want a leader of your country that makes it so that the bill is explicitly just for one group? For me, even the Stop Asian Hate bill, I'm like, why isn't it just like, we stop? There is to some degree, like, you need to look at specific groups and specific policies for sure. But a lot of the problems that are the main problems within the black community, like poverty, like crime, these things that occur, they happen in a lot of communities as well. So to me, it doesn't have to be like just black people that...
I agree for the most part. That that's the case. I think for most legislation, you don't actually have to target groups. I think most legislation can just be targeted to class. It doesn't mean that each individual group doesn't have unique struggles that they're dealing with. Right. And so like
what would be unique to black people in America?
So I think anti-blackness as it
How do you
stands, like I
target
think.
that in a bill?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways. I mean, for instance, like the things that often target African Americans the most, meaning like housing discrimination, right? Housing, like the rules against housing discrimination are great. They were a great start when they were put in place. But that was the thing that was specifically targeted against African Americans, right? We had covenants,
Actually,
right?
a lot of lawsuits that have been around housing discrimination have included like Hispanics and women and like lots of
yes, and other people have benefited, but I'm saying they had racial covenants specifically saying can't sell it to Negroes, right? Can't sell your house to Negroes.
But those don't exist
This
anymore.
neighborhood, but why don't they exist? Because we targeted those things, right? That was a thing.
Right,
those areas are still
like when Obama
to be
was
fair, those
president.
areas are still like where they said wherever they drew the lines for saying that like you can't sell here. Like those lines, even though the policies don't exist anymore, those lines still very fucking clearly exist when you look at the maps.
Exactly, right?
No, but we're talking about a policy prescription for an issue. So if we can't talk about policies that don't exist anymore because those have already been addressed, of course. Like
Have they been addressed though? Because like you can say that the policies have been removed, but addressed is different.
Do not sell homes to Negroes, and then that policy was gotten rid of. Sure, there may be sentiment.
So what's the aim
exists,
of removing that policy though?
On a policy level, like you have to explain to me, how would you through policy, because I'm sure this has been discussed by many politicians, many political scientists, like how do you through policy get rid of inherent discrimination that isn't on a legal level, that isn't written on the paper? And this is something that have gone through the courts today. So like if someone,
that's not something to be concerned about, right? So I wouldn't bother that issue, right? Like interpersonal systemic issues, just like I just gave you, right? That was an example of a systemic issue.
That's been addressed. So I asked for one right
now.
Sure.
Okay. Yes, but just as Kyo said, those lines, right? Like America, as you very well know, is still segregated along housing lines, right? We have black neighborhoods, right? And those neighborhoods have poor access to economic opportunities, right? Poor access to
choice. Like people like white flight, so a bunch of white people decide to go live in the same area. Black people decide to live in the same area. Hispanics decide to live in the same area.
Whoa! Nope! You went too far, right? In terms of white flight,
poverty-based as well.
Lauren, you know this. Yeah, so I don't know why I have to explain this to you, right? Because I know you already know this.
No, you're condescending.
In terms of, I'm not condescending to you. I'm respecting your intelligence. I'm not condescending to you. I'm saying that I know you already know this. I know that you know that in terms of that white flight was government sponsored, right? Like it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It wasn't simply choices. Now there was a lot of interpersonal racism that happened, right? But that was aided and abetted by government policies. And the reasons why the ghetto still exists is aided and abetted by government policies. So, I'm
curious, which specific policies aided white flight? Like, I'm not saying
sure, no problem. No problem. GI Bill, for instance, right? How GI Bill provided housing for soldiers, right, coming back from the war, right? Provided housing, but it cut out African Americans. So many African Americans could not take care of those benefits, use those benefits, even though they fought just like everyone else did, right?
You're talking about policies that are not in existence today, and I know you're
talking
about
you asked me
white flight, but I'm talking like white flight still exists today. I'm talking about things that's like choices today when we still have issues of housing and where people live. Some of that is generational because communities just grew up in these areas from historical policies that caused this, but I'm saying those policies have changed today. They don't exist anymore. Sure. And a lot of like racial groups living in different areas is very much by choice. Definitely where I live, it's like Chinese people go and live with Chinese and they all speak Mandarin where they are. And a lot of the European population go to certain areas. So like, what policy specifically are we looking at that's like, you're causing this, you're a problem, Obama should have done something about you?
Okay, so first of all, like I think part of the issue here is that you are making some break. That like once a policy is removed, that it's solved. That
I'm not
we
saying
can
it's
go on.
I'm saying what do we do about it?
Great.
What should Obama have done?
So hold on, but first I need to establish. But first, I need to establish this because it's important. Because the past has implications on the future, on the present. Correct? Good. So as long as we understand that, and why those racial lines are there, then that's it, right? Here's a thing to target, right? Transportation within Black communities, right? Like actually targeting funds to Black communities to increase transportation. Some of these neighborhoods were designed, right, in a way that makes it difficult for African Americans to leave those neighborhoods, right, to go to work, right? Because like there was an example in Baltimore. Baltimore was famous for this. How like the highway was designed in a way it cuts off this Black neighborhood. This all came out when that guy died in the police van. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? If you guys, one of you will figure out.
This is actually really interesting what you're bringing up, because
I'm familiar.
this has been a conversation even where when I was growing up, how far the SkyTrain goes outside of Vancouver City, and I lived in. We moved out to an area that was like very high European population area, and no one wanted the SkyTrain to extend out to that area because they didn't want the crime to come in from the city. Which actually didn't have anything to do with race, because in fact, it's mostly like Asian white population in Vancouver. It very much had to do with people in the suburbs not wanting crime to come out to the suburbs. So like a lot of things that yes, there may be some racial implications there, but there's also, like you said, just class implications that I think actually have more to do with it.
Yeah,
but hold on. But 5 seconds. If we accept that we live in a society where it's very difficult to have economic mobility, and one race started on one side of the class gap, and these are problems that existed literally just a generation ago in some of the cases. And some of them, the structural ones that Prime's referring to, the way cities are designed, they still exist. So there's no explicitly racist law left on the books, right? There's nothing that says Black people can't do this, Black people can't do that.
What I just said.
We look at the but hold on.
I just said.
But then we look at the we look at the stats, right? We see that Black people and white people, the wealth gap is like growing to the point where it's almost like larger than it was at the end of Jim Crow, right? And how do you explain that without the racist policy if there aren't still leftover stuff and like structural problems?
Of course, there are leftover issues from these things, but it's a matter of like, do we say this is like explicit racism happening today? Like our politicians are refusing to deal with this racism, or is it just, there are going to be leftover effects on families? It's literally families that were poor and white of any background that grew up with a poor history are going to have trouble breaking out of that. So once again, that brings me to, is this a race issue, or is this just we generally need to help people in these groups issue? Yes, there are racial aspects to it because of historical discrimination, which is going to increase the amount of a certain racial group in this category, but that doesn't mean we have to target it with a specific race specified answer. The same way, like child rape or rape in general, I don't even think this is true, but let's say it affects women significantly more than men. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say that's true if we get rid of like prison statistics and stuff. That doesn't mean we can make laws that defend both genders in a way. That might be a bad example because there are very different big
No, it's actually a very good example. Like, because if we look at like women in the workplace, right? We started offering maternity leave in some places, in some countries, and we even just like did something as simple as changing the dress code at work, right? Like this led to more women in the workplace. So this is a structural change, right? That still assisted a marginalized group to better basically take care of itself.
But what I'm
so like
I
the
used a
traffic
bad
stuff
example.
that basically Prime is referring to would be another example of fixing like a structural issue, right?
Okay, so sure. Okay, so a traffic issue, but to me, that's not even a Black issue. That's like anyone. Maybe it would help Black people.
Yeah, there's probably a few white kids living in.
Lauren, this is what I'm saying.
So the policy can be colorblind, but still anti-racist in its outcome.
So when we designed highways across this nation, right? Like where did those highways go? There was a political decision. For every mile, every inch of road, that was a political decision, right? For some neighborhoods, these highways completely avoid. Others, it goes right through. Guess which one? I'll give you one guess as to which one. It went right through. And then some of them were designed to cut areas off.
Most famous, we do this to white poor people in Vancouver.
Most famously,
shipped, like white homeless people out of the city when we held the Olympics in Vancouver because we just didn't want them.
I can't speak to Canada, right? It's America Junior. It's not my concern. But I'm just saying.
Or because of their history.
No. I know. Poor people also suffer, right? I didn't. No, Lauren, I'm not arguing there, right? That poor white people also suffer. You'll get no argument from me. I want to help them as well too. But there are some issues that are faced almost exclusively to one group, right? And so like targeted legislation, right, to those areas makes a difference. Another example of this, right? And transportation just happens to be in my mind, was in New York, right? The way New York City is designed in terms of these bridges. If you've ever gone to New York City, right? There's these fantastic, right? There's these bridges, right? In certain areas that are too small, right? Too low for buses to go under. That was done on purpose by, I think his name is Robert Mosley. If I get his name wrong, I apologize. But like, he was an explicitly racist individual who helped design that system, and he wanted to keep black people out. Though they lived in neighborhoods that would have been served by those buses, he wanted to keep them out from getting to jobs that in the city, right? That's an example right there.
So like, to me,
hold on,
I don't.
We're at an 11.
Okay.
We're at an 11, and we've had a really chill night. So I think we like literally all agree here that we want to help people who are in these bad situations, and it's disproportionately black people. Like in a lot of cases. Someone in the chat
just said this guy hated what he considered white trash too. But like I don't see any problem. I don't see any problem with fixing transportation issues. Like, who's going to disagree with you on that policy? Like, I don't.
Yeah,
understand.
but that would be like a racially that would be a colorblind policy that still has an anti-racist outcome due to the fact that it is disproportionately like benefiting a minority group, right?
Okay, so we could just basically like let's fix.
That's what I'm saying. If we can just like basically wage a war on poverty, we fix most of the issues, and then we fix the structural issues that are still facing black people outside of that once we're done. While we're doing it, ideally.
So hold on. I think you
are an anti-black politician, or not anti-black, but you're not a supporter of the black community if you don't fix this transportation issue. I really just think it's like, hey guys, we need to fix these transportation issues. Like,
so hold on. No. Because once again, what I'm saying here is that the ghetto itself, right? The ghetto as we know it, as we think of it, is maintained by these structural issues. And I'm saying that if we don't specifically hold on, listen. Yeah. If we don't specifically target these areas, because I hear you on this like, hey, it will be helpful in so many policies. I'd agree with you. Be helpful in general, right? But we've had decades of politicians doing exactly this thinking. Let's help.
But you want to target the areas, right?
The working class in general, but it's not enough. If you actually care about dismantling these neighborhoods, about dismantling this poverty that is
making the connection.
Yes, but Prime, you're saying that you want to target the areas. So if there are white people who are also suffering living in those areas, they get to benefit from that policy as well, even if it's not benefiting them over. Like, it's not going to say in the law, like, we're helping out black people. You're just going to target black community.
Whites don't need not apply. We're not going to do that. But still, that doesn't mean that you're not.
What I'm trying to say needs to be clarified with this stuff sometimes, because that's not what's heard.
Yeah, but like, I think there's a bit of a difference in no, I hear you, Spectre, and I appreciate that. I just think what happens is that we have this kind of conversation, right? And then the end, or what we leave off, we end with is, let's target the working class. That's not what I'm talking about, though, right? I'm saying like targeted legislation to areas, right? Areas that these people live in, right? Like talking about like, how can we improve black schools, but they don't have the funding they need, right? How do we change that? Well, if we could just have like national funding for schools, that'd be a way of doing this, right? Not living up to local. Sorry.
Can I just ask you a quick question? Like, this conversation started with Obama, and you saying that you didn't think he was being tiptoeing around being a pro-black president. So do you think he was like intentionally not targeting these transportation issues? Like, that's what I find difficult to make the connection here. Like,
transportation was just an example, right? That was just the one that top him.
He's intentionally not addressing this. Like, that's what I find.
So what I think is what he was doing, what you were thinking of, Lauren, right? And that just target working class communities, right? And that'll do it, right? When that isn't enough, because there are working class whites, and then there are working class African Americans, right? Yes, they share a lot of struggles, and I think they should unite in
Wait,
that
but if you were
cause,
just
right?
targeting working class
But
communities,
African Americans are literally worse off. So yes, there needs to be a target. So simply raising all boats doesn't necessarily mean that African Americans end up in the same place as whites who are working class. Sorry, go ahead.
So if
No,
I
I kind of
this
see what you're
happens-
saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
The issue I'm having is like, so okay, so you're saying he did try to target working class communities. So if he missed communities and they don't have the proper transportation because of historical laws which didn't build highways, which didn't build bus systems in there, then he didn't fail to address Black issues. He failed to target that working class community, which was his initial goal. So he should have done that better.
He failed to target the communities that were having the worst outcomes, right? Because what we've discovered is that if we look at poor rural communities, like their kids actually graduate at the rate that you would expect to see from pretty much like the better parts of cities, right? Like these poor rural communities actually don't need as much funding for their schools. I don't know why, right? A teacher might be able to explain it, but in like inner cities, their schools require more funding in order to have like the higher graduation rate. And it's probably somewhat due to the environment, right? So these schools, for example, would need actually like additional attention, whereas the rural communities that may be poor, maybe working class, don't need that attention. And
I think a lot
disproportionately
of that has to do with rural
due to the way that
more
like
community.
I think the inner city Black communities have quite a bit of community.
And why are they broken? Why are they broken?
Historical trauma, lots of different reasons.
Yeah. But not even just historical.
That needs extra
present
attention.
day. Yes, and that but
bad
present
policy
day trauma
as well. Terrible policies put in place that tore apart Black communities.
Yeah. Sorry, like for instance, the drug war, right? The drug war that's been it is a race neutral policy, the drug war, right? You won't find Black anywhere, but it's targeting African American neighborhoods, right? Like that's where the police will focus their attention. You know, like just like I do. I'm sure you want to college.
It's a chicken and egg argument there, but yeah.
Well, I mean, we know from the Nixon administration, right? That they started targeting these communities, right? Like they're like, well, we're not going to say the N-word anymore. We'll just target these communities any which way through legislation, right? Like we get like. That's been an explicit goal of like
a lot of your problems are with things that we've actually like historical issues, which I think still affect today. But the things we're actually focusing on the most are things that we've actually
no.
Current issues. I think that the sentencing for crack is still higher than cocaine, I believe. Like if I'm
why is it that African Americans who smoke pot near the same amount
people can still work when they do a lot of cocaine.
Why is it that African Americans
and crack aren't both distinguishable from each other chemically? Like it's just,
why is it that African Americans who do marijuana at the same rate as whites are arrested far more often than them, right?
I don't know if that's true.
Exact same.
I think I had a debate panel on this, and that's not true.
Well, that's the thing is we
actually are. But the point is that for the enforcement of that, it happens in Black neighborhoods. When
I think that's what I mean. I don't mean they're not arrested more often. My point is there are a lot of people misunderstand police allocation of resources. I find in a lot of cases it's a Black community, we're going to go there. We're getting a lot of calls. People want us to be here. Like this is where we're getting the most calls to be, so we are allocating resources to this area. There is data to line up with that.
But that's because violent crime is higher in areas that are stricken by poverty, like across the board. Yes. If you adjust for poverty, they're equally as high.
No, but that's still not the point that I'm trying to make, Spectre. You're making a different point. That's not the point that I'm making.
But the white communities aren't over-policed as much because they're in rural areas. Like that's all I'm saying.
Okay, so that's not my point. My point is that
rate for Black people.
My point is that we have specific policies in which we allow police to throw people up against the wall, right? Search their pockets and look for a crime. We have police, right? Like it's not like they're responding to a call, right? We know that police more often stop Black motorists than white motorists until it's nighttime and they can't tell the skin color. Right? Then that disappears. We know
there are like a million different factors in that cover of night thing that are not properly
Now,
considered.
then I love to talk to you about it some other time. But the point is that we can see that police do not, beyond them being called to respond to crimes, right? They patrol these areas. They enforce
You know,
laws
of
in these
course,
areas
they're patrolling
more,
those areas more because there's higher crime there, and
more
of course there are going to be more
aggressively.
arrests
More
done
again,
because Black people commit crime at a higher rate, and
I
of course, like we both know that. You know, of course, there are different arguments as to why that reason is, but we both know that. Like,
yeah, I agree. I didn't say that. I didn't say anything about that. Right? I'm talking about the same crime. That's why I brought it up. That's why I was careful with my words. Talking about marijuana, right? Talking about a substance that.
okay, so which study is this from? Like, I don't want to get into studies tonight,
I'm
but
sorry.
I just don't know if that's
I'm sorry,
exactly.
Lauren. I didn't
just
come
find,
prepared.
yeah, I know. No, it's okay. Like, I don't want to do that either. But I just find a lot of people, whenever people bring up like this racial policy, like I had a debate with, I wish I could remember his name. It was with Destiny, Fanatic. That's his name. And he was like, Lauren, like 90% of people who were attacked by police dogs in Ferguson were Black. This is like clear evidence of discrimination. And then after I go and I open up the data and it's like there were 5 dog bites in 7 years or something. And you know, you just can, and the population there is like 80% Black. So it's just insane to get any sort of reasoning from that this was a racist attack that happened. I could sit here and like, I trust you on face value, but I've got a lot of trust issues because of stuff.
We'd
like
have
that.
to actually. Okay, so fair enough. Look, we said we only have 15 minutes to do this. Maybe we could have a longer conversation on this. And actually come prepared. I didn't expect for this to happen either. But
probably coming in with fucking boxing gloves. Okay. You squared up.
Yeah, you came out. You're like calling me honey and everything.
No, I never called you honey. No, I would never do that. I would never do that. And like I said, I come in assuming I respecting anyone's intelligence. I'm not trying to condescend to anyone. I know that since you talk about this all the time, you're familiar with these concepts that I'm telling you about. So that's it. But yeah, I think. I mean, clearly you and I have some common ground here, right? We can see that there is a problem, and I think maybe we could just try to agree on some of the solutions here. So is it the case? And I just want to get this out of you, right? Is it the case that you don't feel that there are any current systemic issues? Is that how you feel? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
It's okay. I disagree with a lot of the ways people define systemic racism.
Okay. So how do you define it then?
If I may, like probably what she's thinking of when she thinks of systemic racism is that it's a law that's specifically targeted at a specific race, whereas what we're thinking of when we look at systemic racism is it's a law or policy that has a racially disparate outcome. Okay,
actually, yes, kind of like that. Yes. So one thing I will bring up often in real life conversations, I actually haven't really brought this up much on stream, is often systemic racism is defined not as a policy that directly targets a certain group, but as a policy that negatively impacts them, whether it was made to target them or not. And I think that's something you were pointing to here, where it's like, okay, maybe this policy didn't explicitly say Black people, but it negatively impacted them to this large extent. This decision to build a road over here and not over here obviously hurt Black people. So like you look at vaccine passports or vaccine mandates, Black people do not want to get vaccinated in New York to a large degree. They are some of the least likely group to go out to get vaccinated. So disproportionately, they are affected by vaccine mandates. Does that make vaccine mandates racist?
So I think so. The idea here is that like you want to look at things through those lenses, right? I think it actually is important to understand that when we do put vaccine mandates in place, when you do have a group of people who is significantly less likely to be vaccinated, that we understand that we're impacting that group, right? When we're talking about it at a policy level, what we need to do is try and offset some of these policies. That when we do put them in place, if it does have a systemic effect on a group of people, that would be like overall negative, that would probably be a group that's already like being harmed very specifically, like they're not a group that could just take the hit. Like obviously like the the black community isn't a group that can realistically just take the hit from this shit, right? We have to understand that we should be offsetting it in some way. It's a lens that we can use. Like, I don't like that we call these things racist. It feels like that we have, like, people have a hard time differentiating between, like, the person walking around in the KKK hood and lighting crosses on people's lawns to the transport policy in New York of 1990, right? Like, these things are really, like, people would call these both racist, and that's understandable, but those words mean usually the former thing compared to the latter thing. I think it's better to understand that we use these things as lenses, as different kinds of glasses that we put on to see different parts of the world, to understand how we affect others and what makes effective or ineffective policy.
Okay, like you, my friend, but I feel like you've obscured a very simple question. Is it a racist policy or is it not? Like, does it make it racist?
I think it's more complicated than just saying is it racist or not. That's all.
That's
I would argue
fair,
it doesn't. I would argue
I want to hear
that.
from Prime.
So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think it's okay to have. Okay, so for instance, that Stop Asian Hate bill, right? If it targets.
Can you just yes no? Do I get a no on that? Is it racist? Are vaccine mandates racist or not? Are they systemic racism?
No.
Do you think that Asian hate?
I'm going to answer. Like I was talking about my previous strategy session. I was talking about the mask mandate in New York, right, and how the enforcement was disparate, right, and that we had a situation where we have violent crackdowns of African Americans for violating the mask mandate, but and there was a video of this happening, right, but at the same time in this park, right, across the city, where white people were chilling out in the summertime, right, they were violating the mask laws. There were cops handing out masks to them, right? Just handing them out rather than throwing them up against the wall. So the enforcement can be racist. I don't care that it has a disparate impact. So I can say the law isn't racist, but the enforcement of it can be racist. Does that make sense?
I mean, I see what you're saying, but that's kind of a separate question from what I'm trying to address. The main question I'm focusing on is if a policy is put in place and it disproportionately affects one group, if the effect is caused by the group's decision, like personal decisions or personal behaviors, does that impact, does that make the policy racist or not? I'm not talking about the
not
enforcement.
Necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
So that tends to be my problem with the definition of systemic racism, is a lot of people will say things are systemically racist that are actually based a lot on the individual behaviors and decisions of certain groups.
Well,
if you're
so here's a better example. So like women,
where does this decision come from?
I'm about to get a good idea out here.
Okay.
I promise. So like people saying it's sexist that more women aren't in STEM, when we know for a fact women choose to go into more social sciences. Like they want to do that. And it's like, no, it's not actually sexist to give women that choice.
No. Okay. All right. So that's the problem with this, is that you have to dig deeper. Yes, a lot of women choose, exactly what you said, to go into social sciences rather than STEM. Right. But let's talk about their experiences.
Are there societal factors that convince them to do that? Is that
there are some? I've talked to them anecdotally, and we can see this in the data, right? That women are discouraged, right? Women, not even women, girls are discouraged from going into these fields for having interest here, right? They are discouraged. That's something that needs to be changed. We need to be putting in place policies. And I'm not exactly sure what the best way to do this, but I'm sure we can come up with something. But yeah, right? You understand what I'm saying? So we have women who come into
20 years ago. Maybe 20 years ago, but like I grew up in the era of Girl Boss, where my high school was filled with join STEM, please. We will pay you to join STEM. Like the army. Okay. I almost joined the army and they were like, please, for the love of God, we will make you an officer. We will give you your own airplane. Please just join. Like there is no discouragement in if you go to a university, the universities will beg you as a woman to go into these fields. Like I can't even express how awkward it is being a woman, being like, no, please just let me do social sciences. Leave me alone. I want to do this thing. And they're like, please.
But that's not enough.
It's not enough to literally be begging them.
I hear you. I hear you, Lauren, right? But it's not enough. It has to start way before, first of all, right? And I can't speak to this particular policy. I'm not sure if it's a Canadian policy or American policy, but like I can't speak to the one you're talking about. But like even if that's in place here in the States, you still have to start earlier, right? When girls find that they are discouraged from going into these things, that they're not supposed to be there, then just saying at college, right, when many of them have already made up their mind as to which direction they're going to go to, does not necessarily solve that issue. It's a deeper issue to deal with. Like, does that make sense, right? Correct?
Yeah,
That,
but
like,
also is it an issue?
that we don't have women in those fields, is that an issue?
That
You're
like
saying
there's just
that's
some women that some women want to do it and a lot don't.
yeah, I think
If
it
one
is.
group of
I think
people is making a decision to do something disproportionately to another group of people, I would ask what it is that's surrounding that group of people that's leading to a
when we
disproportionate
Like, do we
see-
all
decision.
have to do everything at the same rate as each other? Like,
No. So here's a good example. Yeah.
like
So
gender based.
So obviously we have like a good example of like trades, right? Like we have like a set of people in society who are significantly more likely to go into trade and another group of people who are significantly less likely to go into trade, right? And we understand that there is it's like a sex-based difference, like easily a sex-based difference, right? I think it's like 80 to 90% of people in trade are like men, right? And these are like higher risk jobs.
They literally have the muscles more for it. Like it's like literally on a biological level, they're going to be better at these jobs.
Yeah. Right, so like you would like got the big broad muscles and the shoulders, and these are things that like people carry. I don't know, but like plumbing, any of these other things, right? Like not every trade job requires like massive muscles, right?
Yeah, but also like men just think different from women. Can we just be real? Like men think different.
Yes.
What do you mean by
exactly?
think
No,
different though?
No. I'll stipulate this. Men think differently from women. Men arrive at conclusions that women don't, and vice versa, right? Because of their experiences, because of societal influences, all that stuff. Men think differently from women, and that's important, right? We see this in the medical field, medical sexism, right? Where women in their issues, right, are not taken seriously, right? There are plenty of women who talk about this. Their issues aren't taken seriously by doctors, right? You can see this throughout history, and you can also medical racism follows the exact same track. You can see this issue throughout history, right? When women were considered like fucking hysterical. They just said like, you don't like your husband, you must be fucking hysterical, right? Like,
yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. I know what you're saying. You're saying
Okay.
like this is like a sociological factor, that the way women think differently from men is because of socialization.
And it could be from a structural way of the brain. I could give you that too. That's fine. I'll do that.
Yeah. So people
Yeah,
want
I think it's a structural thing as well.
People like I mentioned before, like a lot of these things are environmental, a lot of them are genetic, and it'd be like weird that we discounted one to the other. It feels like we have these convos, we wire too hard in nature or nurture when the consensus is, and like pretty much everyone's understanding the Arsenal long enough, is it's a mix between the two, but one of those we have control over. Right.
Exactly.
Like, why I don't understand like the desperation from people to control it to such a great degree, especially when like I'd understand if it's if it's a problem, like the big debate that's going on right now where it's like pedophilia. We want to really sociologically try to figure out how we can stop this from occurring in people because we don't want kids to get raped. Like to me, that's like, yeah, we should figure that out. But when it's like women in certain fields of work, whether they want to be a writer or they want to get into plumbing, I feel like we've got much bigger issues to deal with than that.
Well, women aren't.
And it's just like not
marginalized.
actually, it's a non-issue to me.
Women aren't feeling marginalized to the point where they need to do marches at this stage. Like, I mean, in some ways they still are, and they still feel like they need to do that. Like we're about to overturn like probably Roe v. Wade here before the next election, and that's going to be the reason that Democrats turn out to vote. But like, yeah, I think that there is a special case with the Black community in America, that they have continued to be left behind despite the steps we've taken to uplift other marginalized groups. And I think that needs to be addressed a little bit more than other stuff does, just because they're starting to feel like they're left behind.
What steps have been taken for other groups of like non-white people that haven't been taken?
Japanese Americans were given
community.
reparations after the internment camps in World War II.
Okay.
The government literally went
So
in
do you
and said,
do you think
okay,
people should be getting reparations for slavery or something? Like, is that the insinuation
I don't
here?
think that it needs to be a direct cash payment. If you ask me personally, I would say probably target infrastructure in their areas, and then maybe
Okay, so
also
like
give them some
fix the
kind of
trains
tax credit.
again.
But I don't even need
I'm
that. But
sorry.
I don't even. But I don't even need that specifically, right?
I
As
feel
much
like
as
so many of the issues you guys have and so many of the things you're talking about,
yeah.
it
Here's the
ends up
thing.
being this like airy fairy like structure.
I don't think that we need to call it about this. I don't even think we need to break it down to like racial stuff, right? We can just say that like, okay, we accept that rural communities, even though they are disproportionately like working class, right? They don't necessarily need the same help that urban working class communities do, right? So we should probably just target those, and that's going to mostly be disproportionately targeting like minority communities that have been left behind. And
This
we
is
can
where I
start
disagree
there.
with you. Yeah.
Yeah. We can start there, and then there's also like issues with policing that Prime would probably bring up. That's a little bit more contentious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were saying like why does
I mean, I
this
see what
need
you're
to happen?
saying, and I agree with a lot of it. I just, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's fine. You were saying why do we need these? Because it actually has deadly effects, right? Talking about like what issues are made a priority within these different fields, right? The medical field, what's a priority? And how are patients treated has health outcomes, has actual health outcomes. Medical racism has health outcomes, where we the whole thing with black women having higher rates of infant mortality, pregnancy mortality, or whatever that's called, right? That has these things happen because one, we don't have people in place who care about these issues, and two, there are other. Even if we do have people in place, right? Like we could have like a black head of a hospital, right? But if structures aren't changed, if systems aren't changed, if systems are still the same, then you have black faces, right, who are in high places, who are running the same machine, right, who are operating it just the same way as anyone else does. There actually needs to be change, not just changing who's in charge,
I don't
but
think
also the like how do these institutions work?
I've got a point
I
I
don't
want
think we
to.
disagree. But what's your prescriptive solution to like address things like medical
That's
racism?
that I want to just build on that a little bit more because that's exactly the question I'd have. I understand when we talk about like specific nuances that people groups feel. This is something I'll admit that I was kind of ignorant on early on in my political career is those tiny little nuances that you feel like as a woman, and I hate saying stuff like this, like I despise it, but I have absolutely had experiences where I know I have been discriminated against because I'm a woman. And I'm sure men have been in that position. I'm sure, obviously, lots of different groups have been in that position. But when I'm in that position and I'm like, whoa, there's actually an aspect of this industry that's like, oh, you want a job? Sleep with me. That exists in a lot of places. But in my mind, I'm like, how do you deal with that? Like, how do you there? And especially because we've already got so many policies in place that are almost too far to the point that it's hurting people, like people that are getting me too'd wrongly. Um, like to some degree, yeah, what is the prescription when you talk about, okay, we can't just have black people in power of systems that were created by white people because they're just going to be applying the same white colonial ideas, so
Mhm.
like that doesn't work because that's what they've been structurally convinced to do in this
It's a start, but
society.
it's
Yeah,
not
and
enough. Yeah.
they're to get promotions and everything, they're going to have to do
Mhm.
the things that the society views as ideal. Like
Mhm.
to me, it almost takes you to like the alt-right conclusion of we just need to create Wakanda and like split people up so that we've got one system where it's like, all right, black people are just in charge of black people, white people are just in charge of white people, and then
But
the
that's
women and the
not
men they separate in the mosque so we don't have to deal with too much
just
conflict
so we
between
can
them. Like it's
just to steel man you and make sure that we understand what you're saying. Though, are you saying that that's a solution that you would support, or that's a
no,
solution that you
I'm
feel like
saying
this
like that.
rhetoric leads you to?
Yeah, like to me, for me, when it comes to these problems, as much as it sucks sometimes to be in a position where I'm like, oh crap, I literally didn't get a job because I didn't flirt with the guy. Like something bad happened to me because I wasn't perceived or I refused to allow myself to be perceived as a sex object. Rather than be like, I need to apply like political policy to this immediately, I'm like, that's just reality and it sucks. And if I try to apply political policy to all these things, I'm going to end up if I actually want to solve these things, you're going to end up at that kind of crazy solution, because unfortunately, this is just human nature. This is how humans work.
But
So
do you
that's not the
agree
policy I'm saying we apply. My policy is, well, unfortunately, that's just how things are going to be. We can only go so far with policy to fix situations. If we wanted to go further, you'd have to go full, like, split up the genders, Wakanda, like, ethno state.
But you would also, but you would say that, first of all, you want to live in a society where that's not the case, and all the genders and races, and like everybody can just be together in harmony. We can all be like Americans or Canadians or whatever. Excellent.
Yeah, of course, I want to live in a
and
world where we all
then-
get along. That's great.
In addition to that, like, you think that
I'm not
the ways
ignoring
that,
chat.
like-
I'm sorry, my chat are losing it at me right now.
Oh my
I love
God.
you guys.
No,
I'm
I
just
know.
into this conversation, all right, y'all? Keep going, my
Then,
friend.
So if we, do you think that some of the ways that I've laid out that we can kind of like make sure that we're targeting this in a way that it's not like reverse racism? At least like, yeah, it's just not. It's just
No, I agree
anti-racist.
I agree with the
So we could
prescriptions you
at least
forward.
do that. So that being said, Prime, I'm sure that you've thought a lot about this. What would your like prescriptions be for stuff like medical racism, stuff that is like systemic and specifically targeted like at Black people in that way?
Okay. So when it comes to medical racism, what's one of the issues? First of all, we find that medical racism, at least with the mother mortality rate, I think that's what's called, whatever. Like that is constant, not just over, and this is important, not just over economic class, right? So you'll see this also in African Americans who are middle class and upper class. Right, across the board, this is the case, right? So this is another example of something that needs to be targeted. Just saying that the working class maybe doesn't have access to proper medical care, which is true, doesn't solve this issue. Okay, great. So then beyond that, we have staff that will patently ignore the pain of African Americans, right? We have stories of patients asking for help, or their advocates asking for help, and the staff ignoring them, saying that whatever it is, you're not actually feeling, right? And then they die. Right?
I hate to be that bitch, but it's almost like part of this is like, for me, I've had that where it's like a doctor is not listening, they do not get it, and it's like you have to hop doctors until you find someone that'll listen, and like part of
That's
it
true.
is almost like free market.
But
it's also
I hate to say that,
but it's also still bad if that's happening to you, because if you don't have the
by
money,
free
it's still,
market, I mean,
hold on, please, because we can get to
sorry,
agreement here. Like, that's also still bad if it happens to you, right? Like, and it's bad if it happens to Black people, especially because, like we've already established, they're disproportionately poverty-stricken, so they don't get to take advantage of the free market like you do. So, Prime, again, what is like you have a prescriptive solution here?
That's why I wanted to.
I know, but you're getting, yeah, you're talking about like
Spectre, you're not letting me finish my point, so I can't tell you. Let me tell you, and then you'll know.
She cut you off, not me. So just let me tell her, and then you can go ahead.
Great. So my point is, right. So one, we need actual training, right, to address these things. So we know that when these things are just starting off with, when you point them out to people, right, that this is a thing that others engage in, not you, right, dear white people, we don't want to offend your feelings, right, but just people in general engage in, right, then people are more likely to not do that themselves, right. There's a large portion of the population, they're not like inherently racist, like targeting Black mothers, right, and wanting them to die, but like they'll engage in exactly this because Black pain is ignored, right. So okay, you can start with that, right. You can start with greater not closing or reopening, hospitals in Black communities, right? Because there's been a lot of closures, right, of these hospitals, and it takes time for mothers to get to this medical attention, right? Reopening those hospitals, another target to those communities, right? It has to go there, not just anywhere, to those communities. Got to be targeted, and that time can cause lives to be lost, right? I'm sure I can come up with some, like, a few other things, but like that's like a starter pack.
I've actually got a prescription I want to offer. Okay, so the problem I would have, first of all, with like your kind of anti-racist education is we find in a lot of data that anti-racist education tends to actually push people more racist in situations because they feel they're being told, like, you're racist, we need to, if it's done in a certain way. We know this.
That's
there's
why
been
I
studies
already
done on
accounted
it.
for that, right? Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying a better version. Now I really want to address when I said free market because I feel like a bunch of people are like, well, if Lauren just is like, guess they'll all die. No, that wasn't the point I was making. More so, if you have, obviously there would be a huge amount of Black women in America that when they deal with, if they go into a doctor and that doctor doesn't listen to their issues, it's like, this is exhausting. I just want to find someone that's actually going to listen to my issues, and I just want to go to them. That's all I want. Simple as. So like a situation where, like people have said, you get. This is a very socialist suggestion, but I'm trying to think of the mindset from the lefties on the panel.
Right.
Calm down, chat. All right.
We love it.
You can take your specific kind of insurance and the doctors are benefited from you going to their offices, and the people who do the best hopefully will be rewarded in that sort of situation. Unfortunately, in a lot of circumstances, it's just, like with schooling and stuff, it's complicated. It's certainly complicated. There's little incentive for reward with a lot of unions. It's I can do whatever I want, I can be as lazy as I want, and you have to hire me the next year or we're going to protest and we're going to shut down. That causes issues.
You fucking watch yourself talk about unions, all right?
I think there's a lot of good aspects of them too. They started the first January 6th in Australia, the unions. They took over the capital there.
That's
not a good thing I'm saying. Oh, geez,
that's misinformation. We do not shit talk the CFMEU and people posing to be CFMEU members here, okay? You be careful. The CFMEU they're a very militant union here. They'll find you in Canada.
I'm sure they will.
They fucking will. It's the CFMEU. They threw petrol bombs at people, okay?
More of an incentive
allegedly
that actually rewards people that do good at their job would be better. And unfortunately, I think a lot of systems don't do that. They're just like, you get people in like positions. I don't know if they have the same version medically, but like of tenure where they're just, I had a teacher in high school. She never showed up to the class. She just online shopped the whole time and she was tenured and like, we didn't get any education in that class. It was shocking. And she couldn't be fired. And there are issues like that that were shockingly put in place to protect workers at some point and to protect another class, and now they've caused problems down the line for another group. It's tough. It's a tough, complicated.
Systems aren't perfect.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if you addressed. Maybe you got thrown on a tangent there, but I'm not sure if you addressed the medical. Oh, I'm sorry. If I was trying
to as a woman. Oh my gosh. When I am very particular about where I go for medical advice. I'm very particular about who I go to, even just for like something like a massage. I want to be very particular and know like other women have said this is a good person. This is like someone that's going to address your issues properly. And so much of that happens through word of mouth. And unfortunately, yeah, you're right. I think there's like definitely a lack of options in poor communities where like that's the doctor, that's what your healthcare provider allows you to get, and that's it. And they know they can do as crap a job as possible because that's the only option they have. There's no real competition, and there's a lot of difficulties with people to break into that education system. So I think, I agree. I just think we disagree on what the actual approach is.
Yeah, and this would require a much deeper conversation about like how hospitals operate, how they set themselves up within communities, how there isn't actually like room for competition really within the market in a way that doesn't lead to honestly worse outcomes. So like that's a whole other
consolidation. It's another thing that's, I'm not sure if that's happening in Canada, but it's here in the US. That's happening a lot in terms of like hospital chains buying them up, right? And then like cutting services or maybe closing them down. There's a whole list of reasons. And some of these things just have disparate impact, right? Like to poor individuals. And some of them seem to be not quite targeted, but certainly we see that Black individuals, this is a unique thing for them to be facing. And so we need policies that specifically target that.
My friends, I've stayed on this panel very late. I'm going to quickly have a moment with my chat, but let's plan another time. Let's have another conversation. It was really lovely chatting to you, Prime, and my alcoholitics guys. You were lovely.
I'll reach out to you then.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for coming on tonight,
oh, man,
Lauren. I
did
appreciate you
Spectre-
making time. He's changing his background. Get by the way, Spectre go love so I can do the thing. Appreciate you coming out tonight, Lauren. I know you're like a very busy person, and obviously you've got to vet the people you talk to a little bit more than most people, I guess. I hope that you had a fun time.
I've learned that tonight. No,
no, I was gonna say I hope you had a good time tonight. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and that you walk away with like a positive feeling of it. I had a good time. It was a good chat. It was nice to get to know you a little bit better.
absolutely.
I would love to have a more contentious conversation sometime in the future if you're up for it.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love contentious conversations. I can't wait.
Let's have a fight. I love it.
You came here fucking fight tonight, man. Like,
you guys, you let me on, and then she asked me, and then I'm like, oh, this is a systemic racism thing, and then I did come in looking to throw a punch. I swear to God, I didn't do that.
Invite him in when we're talking about like demographics. I just invite my friend Prime in.
No. Like that was. Oh my God, no, that really wasn't it. He just like messaged us when he went offline. And if you would ever like to have like a non-contentious, hopefully, conversation about like the Great Replacement stuff or any of this, I'm always down. I don't like to do the blood sport shit.
Sounds great, guys. All right, I'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Bye bye.